Are these new rules going to take over your life on October 2nd? Will you become a criminal? I think I will. I commit crimes every waking hour, according to these new rules, and I will probably be imprisoned for them. How about you? Are you ready for this? Ready for what, you're saying? This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? We don't even know what the global elites are passing into international law and what it means until it actually comes crashing down on us. This week, the United Nations is meeting in New York City for what they're calling the Summit for the Future. If you follow this channel, you already know that. You know it is what they're calling the most important meeting of a generation. But what I didn't know until just last week is they are adding something terrible to what is already bad. And we need to give a shout out to a community member, Richard Longacre, for letting me know about this. And by extension, letting all of us know about this. Everything about your life is going to change, and it's going to begin to change next month. The summit's primary piece of global legislation is something called the Pact for the Future, which will change the way the world is governed, taking power away from the nations, taking away their national sovereignty, and giving it to the United Nations. Want to know why the leaders of the nations are lining up to do this? This recent video tells you why, and also the biblical support prophesying that this would happen. The link will be at the end of this teaching. Be sure to watch for it. So in addition to taking away the freedoms provided by your own nation, the UN is adding something extra, something especially challenging to that Summit for the Future, the Convention on Combating Cybercrime. Human rights organizations and information technology experts have called it a threat to democracy and the free world. Here is what the Austrian digital rights group Epicenter Works says about it. One of the world's most dangerous surveillance treaties was approved to standing ovation. End of quote. The UN General Assembly is now due to vote on this during the Summit for the Future this week. If passed, these worldwide rules will change your life, at least until Jesus returns. The proposed international treaty aims to combat cybercrime and improve international cooperation between law enforcement agencies. Like so many international agreements, the stated purpose on the agreement sounds great. Who doesn't want to stop cybercrime? But what if they define cybercrime as anything you say or think that goes against their stated agenda? For this exact reason, more than 100 human rights and civil rights organizations around the world have warned that this treaty is a serious threat to our human rights. According to them, the planned agreement would oblige UN member states to introduce comprehensive measures to spy on their citizens. Quote, the contract is really a surveillance agreement with too few provisions on data protection and human rights. End of quote. So says netpolitik.org. Who is behind this? It all started with a UN resolution initiated in 2019 by Russia, China, Iran, Egypt, Sudan, and Uzbekistan. None of these guys are the bastions of free speech, so a treaty emanating from them is suspect right from the start. European states have proposed changes, but according to the experts, the resulting compromise does not even meet the conditions necessary to preserve privacy and human rights. How about the USA? Well, they're going right along with it, hook, line, and sinker. No changes proposed at all. All the nations seem to want to do away with free speech. It is so indicative of what they want to accomplish. It is so much easier when no one can argue or disagree with you, isn't it? On August 13th, the International Chamber of Commerce, the world's largest representative of the private sector, openly called on the UN not to adopt this convention at the General Assembly in September. Quote, if governments fail again to protect the international human rights, then new, dangerous norms created in international law will haunt us for decades. Now, we're talking about this as a treaty, but it isn't a treaty. If it was, that would mean the USA, Europe, Australia, South Africa, Philippines, wherever you happen to live, would have a chance to override it, correct? No, they won't. This isn't a treaty. It's a change to the UN Charter, a treaty that your nation has already signed off on. Slick, isn't it? You sign off on a treaty 75 years ago, and now they changed the rules on you. We in the USA will be told that just by signing these agreements, treaties is good enough. They don't need to be ratified by our Congresses to become full-blown legal treaties, superseding, of course, the U.S. Constitution, and binding U.S. citizens to these new laws or agreements and controls. The only way to opt out is to leave the United Nations. Doesn't sound like a bad option to me, but that's my opinion. Now, this change to the UN Charter is going to put journalists, whistleblowers, Bible teachers, and really anyone at risk of persecution. The International Press Institute was so concerned about this risk that it placed a full-page ad in the Washington Post. Independent security experts around the world also warned in February that they could face criminal persecution for just doing their work protecting IT systems from cyber criminals under the draft of the convention. And frankly, if you have a cell phone, you might want to turn it off because they listen to us, and anything you say while they're listening can and will be used against you according to this proposed change in the Charter. And since, according to this agreement, quote, crimes will include things like criticizing your leaders or persecuting minorities, this means any casual conversation about politicians you don't like, UN rules you don't like, or gangs that might be taking over your city, well, frankly, anything you talk about that the new global governance system doesn't like is now a crime. They term this misinformation or disinformation, but the idea is only their information is what will be legal. Do you realize the implications of this? Do you have any smart devices in your home? They might record these type of conversations as well. How about email? That is a permanent means of recording your thoughts. How about your neighbors overhearing your conversations even when your phone is turned off? In Matthew 24:10, Jesus said many would fall away and betray one another. So even your friends at church might turn you in if they disagree with you. And certainly those whose ministry is to be a watchman on the wall to alert others to what's happening, sort of like what we're doing right now, those ministries are going to be at extreme risk. That would be channels like the Nelson Walters channel. We would be prime targets. Independent journalists will be prime targets. If this truly is the tribulation, starting October 2nd, this shouldn't surprise any of us. Expect the powers that be to treat us like we're in the tribulation if we truly are. Because of this, Michael Brown and other community members suggested something we're calling tribulation tapes. Michael said it is time we take the 700 Nelson Walters videos available online, organize them by topic, and provide them on inexpensive flash drives so you have your own library when, not if, the Nelson Channel and other similar channels are taken down. Under this new law, even the Last Days Overcomer website will probably be taken down. The only way to preserve teachings as we progress into the tribulation will be to have them on flash drive. I agree with Michael completely, so that is what we are planning to do. I'm going to spend a portion of October organizing these, quote, tribulation tapes And I should have some available, I would think, as early as November if you're interested. So where does this leave us? As we've discussed on this channel multiple times, assuming these things are passed in the Summit for the Future, a covenant with the many will be made, or better yet, enforced on the people of the world. You and I would never sign up for these new international rules like the ones we just discussed. Interestingly, the Daniel 9:27 covenant that launches the tribulation isn't made by the prince of the covenant. The Hebrew word in that verse says it's forced or enforced on the many. It's the Hebrew word gabar, meaning strong or mighty, and it's in the hefel form of the verb, which means the prince of the covenant causes this. He forces this upon the many. Exactly what we see happening right in front of our eyes. So, do we believe the tribulation is likely happening this year? Yes. Commencing on the Feast of Trumpets, October 2nd. Now, we're not saying this must happen. We're just saying it's likely that this is taking place. If that's true, does that mean only 3.5 years until the Great Tribulation? Yeah, well, if we're correct, and we're saying we may not be, but if we are correct, then yes, that's exactly what it means. And new draconian measures, like this new law coming out of the UN, just is making that all the more likely that this is truly it. Isn't this what you expect would happen in the tribulation? This is why the idea of the Tribulation Tapes Project makes so much sense to those on our channel. We'll talk more about this as we move into October, but first I want to discuss the implications of this international law on our daily lives. AI can reduce every soundbite online into text, and then scan that and every written piece of text in milliseconds. They then can apply algorithms to search out those quadrillion gigabytes of data for things that the globalist elite might not agree with. Some of this is already done. You may not know this, but the video that's linked at the end of this one was taken down a number of times. After every time it was taken down, I had to rewrite, re-record, reprocess it, until we had a version that the algorithm thought was acceptable. I'm having to do this all the time anymore. So once these laws are in place, the first level of censorship will be the online platforms. Early next year, I expect the news and teachings that you receive to be drastically changed. Channels and teachers online will comply or they'll be silenced. So I expect our news and interpretation of news to morph into a deep state approved version. And I'm thinking this happens in the first or second quarter of 2025, although could take longer, I don't know, while these laws are being implemented. The next step will be censorship of individuals. Depending on how robust AI becomes and how much data they can process, your emails and phone calls will be monitored next. Following this will be your private conversations recorded by smart devices and your phone. Even computers now have microphones. It allows them to record what is said, so don't forget they are a smart device too. It's going to be a brave new world, folks. This is how the globalists will control the masses. In typical Orwellian style, a ministry of truth will prevent information from getting out that they don't want out. I assume the online platforms that can go viral is where they're going to place most of their attention, and punishment for those opposing the cabal online will be the harshest. And isn't this exactly what you expect from a covenant that will launch the tribulation? The Soviet Gulag system that imprisoned author Alexander Solzhenitsyn among millions of others is an example of what might be coming. They estimate 25 million were in these camps. Do you remember these camps that have been set up in the USA? I wonder how they might use them. So let's take a look at the video I referenced earlier, the one that answers why leaders of the nations are so willing and eager to sign up for all these new regulations that essentially take away the power of the nations that they're in charge of. It's counterintuitive, as you can imagine, yet they're doing it. So click right here to keep watching this video that I had to re-record, half a dozen times to be able to show it to you. This is an important one. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.